I didn't know waking up from a coma could hurt more than the accident that put me there. When I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, my first question was, "Where's Ethan?" He was my fiancé, the person I trusted most in the world. But what I discovered after nearly killed me again, while I was fighting for my life. Ethan and my best friend, Chloe, were busy stealing everything I had, even the company I built with my own hands. They thought I'd never find out, but they forgot one thing. I always kept a diary. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Samantha Hayes, but everyone calls me Sam. I was 32 years old when my life fell apart. I was the CEO of Bellatech, a tech startup I founded at 26. I worked day and night to turn it into one of the most promising companies in the industry. It was my baby, my passion. I poured every ounce of my energy into building something that would change lives, not just mine, but the lives of everyone who worked with me. But let me tell you how it all started. Back when I was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in computer science, I was just another girl trying to make it in a man's world. I remember sitting in job interviews where the men on the other side of the table would nod politely while I explained my ideas, only to later tell me, "We'll get back to you." Spoiler, they never did. That's when I realized that if I wanted to succeed, I'd have to do it on my own terms. So, I started Bellatech in my tiny studio apartment. I lived off instant noodles and coffee for months, coding late into the night. My first product was a simple app designed to help small businesses manage their finances. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to catch the attention of a few local entrepreneurs. From there, things snowballed. Within 2 years, Bellatech had grown into a full-fledged company with a team of 20 employees. By the time I turned 30, we were making headlines in tech magazines and securing funding from major investors. Ethan came into my life during that whirlwind period. He was charming, supportive, and seemed genuinely proud of what I had accomplished. At first, I was hesitant to let him get too close. After all, I had spent so many years focusing solely on my career that I almost forgot what it felt like to trust someone else. But Ethan was different, or so I thought. He listened when I talked about my dreams for the company. He encouraged me when I doubted myself. And most importantly, he made me feel like I didn't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders alone. Chloe was another constant in my life. We met in college and became inseparable. She was the kind of friend who would drop everything to be by your side when you needed her. Or at least, that's what I believed. Over the years, she became more than just a friend, she was family. When Bellatech started gaining traction, I brought her on board as a consultant. She didn't have a background in tech, but she was great with people, and I trusted her implicitly. But then came the accident. A car ran a red light while I was driving home after an important meeting. The impact was brutal. I don't remember anything after the deafening sound of metal crumpling. I woke up 2 weeks later in a hospital bed, tubes connected to my body, and a doctor telling me I was lucky to be alive. What I didn't know then was that while I was unconscious, my life outside the hospital was being destroyed too. During those 2 weeks, the people I trusted most in the world, Ethan, my fiancé, and Chloe, my best friend, were plotting against me. They saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. They saw my absence as a chance to take everything I had worked so hard to build. Ethan was the first face I saw when I regained consciousness. He looked tired, with deep bags under his eyes. "You're okay," he said, holding my hand. "We're all here for you." At that moment, I felt relief. I thought that, despite everything, I still had Ethan. At least there was one thing, right in the middle of this mess. But what I didn't notice was the strange tone in his voice. A slight hesitation before each word, as if he were carefully choosing what to say. His smile seemed forced, his touch colder than usual. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the medication clouding my judgment. Maybe it was the trauma of the accident. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to face it. It was Chloe who told me everything. She came to visit me in the hospital a few days later, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and that smile that used to comfort me. She started talking about how things had changed while I was in a coma. "Sam," she said, "your company, we had to make some tough decisions while you were gone. Ethan and I temporarily took over management. We did the best we could." At that moment, something bothered me. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but I felt a pang of discomfort. Maybe it was the way she avoided looking directly into my eyes. Or maybe it was the overly casual tone she used when mentioning temporarily taking over management. Her words lingered in my mind long after she left. Why did she feel the need to justify herself? Why did she look so nervous? But at that moment, I was still too weak to question anything. My mind was foggy from medication and physical pain. So, I accepted her words without asking further questions. I told myself that once I got better, I'd figure everything out. After all, these were the people who loved me most. They wouldn't betray me, would they? That is, until the day I went home. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, Ethan insisted that I stay with him in his apartment. He said it would be easier for him to take care of me. Reluctantly, I agreed. But as soon as I walked into that place, I realized something was wrong. My laptop wasn't where I left it. The folders with important company documents were gone. Even the whiteboard with strategic notes I used during meetings had disappeared. Everything that defined my life, the tools I used to run my business, was missing. "What happened to my stuff?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Well, Sam, while you were in the hospital, we had to make some quick decisions. We sold some company assets to cover your medical expenses." Chloe handled it. My head was spinning. "You sold what? And why didn't anyone tell me?" He lowered his eyes, clearly uncomfortable. "We didn't want to worry you while you were recovering. Besides, Chloe knows a lot about finances. She assured us it was the best course of action." That didn't make sense. I knew exactly what Belitech's financial situation was before the accident. We didn't need to sell anything. Something smelled fishy, and I needed to find out what it was. But it wasn't until I visited the company office for the first time since the accident that the truth began to surface. When I entered the Belitech building, something immediately felt different. The reception area, which used to be vibrant and full of energy, was silent and empty. There were boxes stacked in the corners, as if they were preparing to move. The air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. "What's going on here?" I asked the receptionist, Lisa, who seemed nervous. "Well, Ms. Hayes," she stammered. "There have been some changes. Chloe and Ethan are overseeing everything now. If you need to speak with someone, I can schedule a meeting." That was enough to set off an alarm inside me. I went straight to the executive floor, where my office used to be, or at least where it used to be. In place of my office, there was a new sign on the door. "Chloe Bennett, Interim CEO." I felt my blood rise to my face. I opened the door without knocking and found Chloe sitting behind my desk, wearing one of my favorite suits. She looked up, surprised. "Sam," she exclaimed, pretending to be happy. "You're back already. That's great. What does this mean?" I asked, pointing to the sign on the door. She hesitated but quickly regained her composure. "Oh, that? Well, while you were gone, we needed someone to lead the company. Ethan suggested I take over temporarily. Don't worry, we're handling everything. Temporarily," I repeated, incredulous. "Since when do you know anything about running a business?" She shrugged, as if it were irrelevant. "I've been learning fast. Besides, we've made some important changes. We sold off some departments to cut costs. Now we're leaner." That was a direct blow. Selling departments, cutting costs. It didn't make any sense. Belitech was growing before the accident. Why would they be cutting resources? I left there furious, determined to find out what was really going on. But something stopped me from confronting them immediately. I needed proof. I needed to understand the extent of the betrayal before I acted. That night, I searched through my things in Ethan's apartment for answers. That's when I found something that made me freeze. An old notebook hidden at the bottom of a drawer. It was my diary. I've always been a private person, and the diary was where I wrote everything. Ideas for the company, future plans, even personal thoughts. As I flipped through the pages, I realized something crucial. I had meticulously documented all the major decisions of Belitech, including the contracts and agreements I made with investors. It was concrete proof that the company was mine, and that any decision made in my absence was illegal. But there was something more. In the last few pages, I wrote about a backup plan I created in case something went wrong. I called it the Phoenix Plan. It was a series of security measures I secretly implemented, including a separate bank account and a safe with essential documents. That gave me hope. I wasn't completely defenseless. I had a hidden arsenal that neither Ethan nor Chloe knew about. That night, I decided I wouldn't let myself be intimidated anymore. They might have betrayed me, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I was Samantha Hayes, the woman who built Belitech from scratch, and I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had achieved. With the diary in hand, I began planning my revenge, but it wouldn't be impulsive. It would be cold, calculated, and relentless. They underestimated me, and that would be their biggest mistake. As I sat in Ethan's apartment that night, clutching my diary, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, but also a flicker of determination. The woman who had spent weeks lying unconscious in a hospital bed was now wide awake, both physically and mentally. The fog of confusion that had clouded my mind since waking up was beginning to lift, replaced by clarity. I realized that while I was fighting for my life, Ethan and Chloe were plotting against me. They saw my vulnerability as an opportunity to take control of everything I had built. But they underestimated one thing: my resilience. I decided to dig deeper into what had happened during my absence. The next morning, I called Lisa, the receptionist at Belitech. She had always been loyal to me, and something about her nervous demeanor when I visited the office told me she knew more than she was letting on. "Lisa," I said over the phone, trying to keep my tone casual, "can we meet for coffee? There are a few things I need to catch up on." She hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "Sure, Sam. Let's meet at the cafe around the corner from the office." When I arrived at the cafe, Lisa was already there, fidgeting with her cup of coffee. She looked even more anxious than she had at the office. I sat down across from her and gave her a reassuring smile. "Thanks for meeting me," I said. "I know things have been different since the accident. I just wanted to get your perspective on how things are going at Belitech." Lisa glanced around nervously, as if someone might be listening. "Sam, I don't know how much I should say. You can trust me," I said firmly. "Whatever you tell me stays between us." She took a deep breath and leaned closer. "Okay, but you didn't hear this from me. Chloe and Ethan have been making some questionable decisions. They've been meeting with investors behind closed doors, and there are rumors that they're planning to sell off more parts of the company. Some of the employees are worried they feel like they're being pushed out." My heart sank. It was worse than I thought. Not only were they stealing my company, but they were also dismantling it piece by piece. I needed to act fast, but I still lacked concrete evidence. I thanked Lisa for her honesty and promised to keep her updated. Over the next few days, I began piecing together the puzzle. I revisited the diary entries where I had documented every major decision and agreement related to Belitech. One entry caught my attention, a clause I had included in the original investor contracts. It stated that any major decision regarding the company required unanimous approval from all key stakeholders. Without my consent, Ethan and Chloe's actions were not only unethical but also illegal. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to dig even deeper. I remembered the safe I had installed in my apartment years ago as part of the Phoenix plan. It contained backup copies of all critical documents, including shareholder agreements, patents, and financial records. If I could access those documents, I would have irrefutable proof of their wrongdoing. But getting to the safe wasn't easy. When I returned to my apartment, I found that Ethan had changed the locks. He claimed it was for security reasons, but I knew better. I hired a locksmith to create a duplicate key, ensuring I could enter without raising suspicion. Inside the safe, I found exactly what I needed: copies of the original contracts, a list of key assets, and a USB drive containing encrypted files. The USB drive was particularly intriguing. It contained emails and recordings I had secretly saved over the years, conversations with investors, board members, and even Ethan himself. These files were my ace in the hole. As I sifted through the documents, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. Building Belitech hadn't been easy. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of self-doubt, and times when I questioned whether I was strong enough to keep going. But through it all, I had persevered. And now, faced with the greatest challenge of my life, I knew I couldn't give up. I began reaching out to old allies, people who had supported me during the early days of Belitech. One of them was Margaret, a retired corporate lawyer who had helped me draft many of the company's legal documents. She agreed to review the evidence I had gathered and provide guidance on my next steps. "This is damning," Margaret said after reviewing the documents. "With this evidence, you can not only reclaim your company but also press charges for fraud and embezzlement." Her words gave me hope, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Ethan and Chloe had powerful connections, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. I needed to be strategic, methodical, and relentless. In the meantime, I continued to play the role of the vulnerable victim. I let Ethan and Chloe believe that I was too weak and confused to understand what was happening. I acted as though I trusted them completely, even though every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. It was a delicate balancing act, but I knew it was necessary to buy myself time. One evening, While pretending to rest in Ethan's apartment, I overheard a conversation between him and Chloe. They were discussing their plans to finalize the sale of one of Belitech's most valuable departments. Their voices were hushed, but I could make out enough to confirm my suspicions. "They'll never see it coming," Chloe whispered. "By the time she realizes what's happened, it'll be too late." Ethan chuckled. "She's too broken to fight back. We've got this in the bag." Their arrogance fueled my determination. They truly believed I was powerless. Little did they know, I was already several steps ahead. As I lay in bed that night, replaying Ethan and Chloe's conversation in my mind, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Their arrogance was both infuriating and empowering. They thought they had already won, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I was Samantha Hayes, the woman who had built Belitech from nothing, who had faced countless obstacles and emerged victorious every time. This betrayal would be no different, but as much as I wanted to confront them immediately, I knew that rash actions would only play into their hands. They had resources, connections, and power on their side. If I wanted to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I needed to outsmart them, and that meant gathering as much evidence as possible before making my move. The next morning, I decided to visit Belitech again. This time, I didn't announce my arrival. I simply walked in, pretending to be disoriented and unsure of myself. Lisa gave me a sympathetic smile when she saw me, but I could tell she was nervous. She probably feared retaliation if anyone found out she had spoken to me. "Can I use my old office for a bit?" I asked her quietly. "I just need some space to think." She hesitated but eventually nodded. "Sure, Sam. No one's using it right now." When I entered the room that had once been my sanctuary, I felt a pang of sadness. It was empty now, stripped of its personality. The whiteboard that used to display our strategic goals was gone, replaced by blank walls. Even the chair I had spent countless hours sitting in had been replaced with something cheaper and less comfortable. But I wasn't there to reminisce. I was there to search for clues. I started by checking the drawers of the desk, hoping to find anything that might help me piece together what had happened. At first, it seemed like everything had been cleared out, but then I noticed a small USB drive taped to the underside of the desk. It was cleverly hidden, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. My heart raced as I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It contained files I hadn't seen before, emails between Chloe and Ethan discussing their plans in detail, financial statements showing unauthorized transfers, and even a draft agreement outlining the sale of Belitech's most valuable assets. This was exactly the kind of evidence I needed. But as I scrolled through the documents, one email caught my attention. It was from an investor named Richard Langston, someone I had worked closely with during Belitech's early days. In the email, he expressed concern about the direction the company was taking under Chloe's leadership. He mentioned that several key clients were considering pulling out due to mismanagement and lack of transparency. This revelation filled me with both anger and determination. Not only were Ethan and Chloe stealing from me, but they were also destroying the reputation I had worked so hard to build. Belitech wasn't just a company, it was a symbol of innovation, trust, and resilience, and they were tarnishing it for their own selfish gain. I saved the files onto my laptop and carefully retaped the USB drive to its hiding spot. As I left the office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I was closer than ever to exposing their lies. Over the next few days, I continued to gather evidence while maintaining the facade of vulnerability. I attended meetings at Belitech, pretending to be too weak to contribute, but secretly observing everything. I listened to conversations, took mental notes, and analyzed patterns. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Ethan and Chloe's greed knew no bounds. One particularly revealing moment came during a board meeting. Chloe was presenting a proposal to sell off another department, claiming it was necessary to streamline operations. But as she spoke, I noticed how vague and evasive her answers were whenever someone asked for specifics. It was obvious she was hiding something. After the meeting, I approached Margaret, the retired lawyer who had been advising me. I shared the new evidence I had uncovered and asked for her opinion on the best course of action. "This is enough to file a lawsuit," she said firmly. "But we need to be strategic about timing. If we act too soon, they'll have time to cover their tracks. We need to wait until we have them cornered." Her advice resonated with me. Patience was key. I couldn't afford to make a single misstep. In the meantime, I began reaching out to other allies. One of them was Daniel, a former employee who had left Belitech after a disagreement with Chloe. He had always been skeptical of her intentions and was eager to help expose the truth. "Chloe's been running the company into the ground," Daniel told me during our meeting. "She doesn't care about innovation or growth. All she cares about is lining her pockets." He provided me with additional insights into Chloe's management style, including instances of favoritism and unethical practices. His testimony would prove invaluable in building my case. As the days turned into weeks, I felt myself growing stronger, not just emotionally, but mentally as well. The betrayal had shattered me initially, but it had also forced me to confront my vulnerabilities and rediscover my inner strength. I realized that Ethan and Chloe's actions, while devastating, had ultimately made me more resilient. But despite my progress, doubt still lingered. Could I really take them down? What if they found out what I was planning? These questions haunted me, especially late at night when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm me. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I remembered something my father used to say: "Adversity reveals character." He had always believed that challenges were opportunities to grow, to become better versions of ourselves. And as I reflected on his words, I realized that this betrayal was not the end, it was a beginning, a chance to rise above, to reclaim what was mine, and to prove to myself and the world that I was stronger than anyone thought. With renewed determination, I finalized my plan. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. As the days passed, I found myself oscillating between moments of clarity and overwhelming doubt. The betrayal had left a void inside me, a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief that people I trusted so deeply could turn against me in such a calculated way. But with each new piece of evidence I uncovered, my resolve hardened. I was no longer just fighting for Belitech. I was fighting for myself, for the woman I used to be before the accident, and for the future I deserved. One evening, as I sat alone in Ethan's apartment, I allowed myself to reflect on our relationship. How had I missed the signs? Looking back, there were subtle clues, moments when Ethan seemed distant or dismissive, times when he avoided discussing Belitech altogether. At the time, I chalked it up to stress or exhaustion. After all, running a business alongside a personal life is no easy feat. But now, those moments felt like glaring red flags I had ignored. Chloe, too, had changed over the years. Once my closest confidant, she had gradually become more ambitious, more calculating. I remembered the way she would casually mention investors, or financial strategies during our conversations, as if testing the waters. Back then, I thought it was harmless curiosity. Now, I realized it was part of a larger plan, a slow, deliberate takeover. These realizations were painful, but they also fueled my determination. If Ethan and Chloe believed I was weak, they were gravely mistaken. The accident may have broken my body temporarily, but it hadn't broken my spirit. If anything, it had awakened a side of me I didn't know existed, a side that was fiercely protective, relentless, and unwilling to accept defeat. With this mindset, I decided to take my investigation a step further. I began attending industry events and networking functions under the guise of catching up after my recovery. These gatherings were perfect opportunities to gather intel and reconnect with people who had once supported Belitech. Many of them expressed surprise at seeing me. They had been led to believe I was still too fragile to return to work. At one such event, I ran into Richard Langston, the investor whose email I had discovered on the hidden USB drive. He greeted me warmly, clearly unaware of the turmoil within Belitech. "Sam, it's good to see you," he said, shaking my hand. "How are you feeling?" "I'm doing better, thank you," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I've heard some concerning things about Belitech lately. Clients pulling out, departments being sold off. Do you know anything about that?" Richard hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "To be honest, Sam, I've been meaning to talk to you. Chloe has been making decisions that don't align with the company's original vision. Some of us are worried about where this is headed." His words confirmed what I already suspected. Chloe and Ethan weren't just stealing from me. They were destroying Belitech's legacy. This realization ignited a fire within me. They weren't just betraying me personally. They were betraying everyone who had ever believed in the company. After the event, I met with Margaret again to discuss my findings. She listened intently as I outlined the latest developments, her expression growing increasingly serious. "You have enough here to file a lawsuit," she said finally. "But we need to be careful. Ethan and Chloe won't go down without a fight. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as unstable because of the accident. We need to anticipate their moves." Her warning stayed with me long after our meeting ended. She was right. Ethan and Chloe wouldn't hesitate to use my vulnerability against me. But I had something they didn't: proof, and I intended to use it to its fullest potential. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build my case. I reached out to former employees, investors, and even clients who had expressed dissatisfaction with Chloe's leadership. Each conversation added another layer to the story. I was piecing together a story of greed, deception, and betrayal. But perhaps the most pivotal moment came when I discovered a secret recording device hidden in my old office. It was part of the Phoenix Plan, a precautionary measure I had installed years ago in case of corporate espionage. The device had captured hours of conversations between Chloe and Ethan, detailing their plans to dismantle Belitech and divide the profits among themselves. Listening to those recordings was both infuriating and validating. Every word they spoke confirmed what I had suspected all along. They saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. But what they didn't realize was that I was no longer the same person I had been before the accident. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. Armed with this newfound evidence, I finalized my strategy. I would file a lawsuit, accusing Ethan and Chloe of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. I would expose their actions to the board of directors, major investors, and the public. And most importantly, I would reclaim control of Belitech not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever believed in its mission. But before I made my move, I needed to confront them directly. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized I knew everything. I wanted them to feel the same fear and uncertainty that I had felt when I first discovered their betrayal. It was time to set the stage. I arranged a meeting with Ethan and Chloe, pretending it was to discuss my resignation. When they arrived at the conference room, they looked smug, clearly believing they had won. "I've decided to step aside," I began, keeping my tone calm and measured. "But before I do, I want to clarify a few things." I then proceeded to lay out every piece of evidence I had gathered. I played the recordings, showed the emails, and presented the legal documents proving my ownership of Belitech. Their faces went pale as they realized the extent of my knowledge. Ethan tried to stammer an excuse, but Chloe interrupted him. "You can't prove any of this," she snapped, though her voice trembled. "Oh, but I can," I replied, smiling coldly. "And I already have. Your actions are being investigated by the authorities as we speak. You'll both be facing charges for fraud and embezzlement." They were speechless. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. After confronting Ethan and Chloe in that tense meeting, I felt a surge of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. Exposing their betrayal was only the first step. Now, I had to ensure they paid for what they had done. The evidence I had gathered was damning, but I knew that simply filing a lawsuit wouldn't be enough. They were powerful, well-connected individuals who would stop at nothing to protect themselves. If I wanted true justice, I needed to dismantle them completely, financially, professionally, and socially. I began by executing the first phase of my plan, leaking select pieces of information to key figures in the tech industry. This had to be done carefully. If Ethan and Chloe discovered what I was doing, they would retaliate. So, I enlisted Daniel's help. He had connections within the industry and understood how to plant seeds of doubt without leaving a trace. "We need to make sure this story gets out there," Daniel said during one of our meetings. "But we can't do it all at once. We have to let it unfold. Gradually make them look guilty without directly implicating ourselves." I agreed. The goal was to create an atmosphere of mistrust around Ethan and Chloe, undermining their credibility before I made my official move. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I orchestrated a series of leaks. Anonymous emails were sent to influential investors, board members, and journalists, hinting at unethical practices within Belitech. Each leak contained just enough truth to raise suspicions, but not enough to reveal its source. The effect was immediate. Rumors began circulating about mismanagement and financial irregularities at Belitech. Clients started questioning their partnerships, and some even pulled out entirely. Investors grew wary, demanding explanations from Chloe and Ethan. Meanwhile, articles appeared in tech blogs speculating about the company's future under Chloe's leadership. Ethan and Chloe were blindsided. They had no idea who was behind the leaks or how much I knew. At first, they tried to brush off the rumors, dismissing them as baseless gossip. But as the pressure mounted, cracks began to show in their facade. Chloe became increasingly defensive, snapping at employees and lashing out at anyone who questioned her decisions. Ethan, on the other hand, retreated into himself, avoiding public appearances altogether. Their unraveling was satisfying to watch. But I wasn't done yet. This was merely the beginning. While Daniel handled the leaks, I focused on strengthening my legal case. Margaret and I met regularly to review the evidence and strategize our next moves. She helped me draft a formal complaint accusing Ethan and Chloe of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Every document, email, and recording was meticulously organized to present a clear and irrefutable narrative. "We'll file this once we're ready to strike," Margaret advised. "Timing is everything. We need to hit them when they're most vulnerable." In the meantime, I reached out to former employees who had left Bellatech due to dissatisfaction with Chloe's leadership. Many of them were eager to share their experiences, providing testimony that further solidified my case. One former manager, Sarah, described how Chloe had manipulated financial reports to justify unnecessary layoffs. Another employee recounted how Ethan had pressured staff to falsify client agreements to inflate revenue figures. These accounts painted a damning picture of Ethan and Chloe's actions, or rather, their lack of integrity. With each new piece of evidence, I felt my confidence growing. They thought they could destroy me, but instead, they had sealed their own fate. As the leaks continued and the pressure mounted, I decided it was time to escalate my plan. I arranged a private meeting with Richard Langston, the investor whose concerns I had uncovered earlier. Richard had always been a staunch supporter of Bellatech, and I knew he would be instrumental in turning the tide against Ethan and Chloe. "Sam, I've been following the rumors," Richard said when we met. "What's really going on?" I took a deep breath and laid everything out for him: the secret recordings, the unauthorized sales, the mismanagement. I showed him copies of the contracts and financial statements proving that Ethan and Chloe had acted illegally. By the time I finished, Richard looked furious. "They've betrayed everyone who ever believed in this company," he said, shaking his head. "You have my full support, Sam. Whatever you need, I'm with you." With Richard on my side, I gained access to a network of influential investors and board members who shared his outrage. Together, we began orchestrating a campaign to strip Ethan and Chloe of their power. We called for an emergency board meeting, where I planned to present my case and demand their immediate removal. But before I could confront them publicly, I needed to address one final piece of the puzzle: the dummy corporation I had created. As part of the Phoenix plan, years ago, I had anticipated the possibility of betrayal. That's why I set up a separate entity, a shell company that owned several of Bellatech's most valuable patents and intellectual properties. Without these assets, Bellatech would be worthless. It was my ultimate insurance policy, a way to ensure that no one could take over the company without my consent. Now, it was time to activate the dummy corporation. I contacted the lawyer who had helped me establish it and instructed him to initiate legal proceedings against Bellatech, claiming ownership of the patents. This move would force Ethan and Chloe into a corner, leaving them with no choice but to negotiate a settlement or face bankruptcy. As the pieces fell into place, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. For so long, I had been the victim, the woman who had lost everything because of someone else's greed. But now, I was in control. Every decision I made brought me closer to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Still, I knew the hardest battles were yet to come. Ethan and Chloe wouldn't go down without a fight. They would try to discredit me, paint me as unstable or vindictive. But I was prepared. I had the evidence, the allies, and the determination to see this through. It was time to strike. I arranged a meeting with Ethan and Chloe, pretending it was to discuss my resignation. When they arrived at the conference room, they looked smug, clearly believing they had won. "I've decided to step aside," I began, keeping my tone calm and measured. "But before I do, I want to clarify a few things. I then proceeded to lay out every piece of evidence I had gathered. I played the recordings, showed the emails, and presented the legal documents proving my ownership of Bellatech. Their faces went pale as they realized the extent of my knowledge. Ethan tried to stammer an excuse, but Chloe interrupted him. "You can't prove any of this," she snapped, though her voice trembled. "Oh, but I can," I replied, smiling coldly. "And I already have. Your actions are being investigated by the authorities as we speak. You'll both be facing charges for fraud and embezzlement." They were speechless. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. After exposing Ethan and Chloe's lies during that tense meeting, I felt a surge of satisfaction, but it was only temporary. The real battle was just beginning. While they were now aware that I knew the truth, they still had resources, connections, and influence on their side. If I wanted to reclaim Bellatech and bring them to justice, I needed to act decisively and mercilessly. I began by leveraging the dummy corporation I had created as part of the Phoenix Plan. This entity owned several of Bellatech's most valuable patents and intellectual properties, assets that were critical to the company's survival. Without access to these patents, Bellatech would be crippled. It was my ultimate bargaining chip and my way of ensuring that Ethan and Chloe couldn't simply walk away unscathed. I contacted the lawyer who had helped me establish the dummy corporation and instructed him to initiate legal proceedings against Bellatech, claiming ownership of the patents. The lawsuit alleged that the company had been operating illegally by using intellectual property it no longer controlled. This move sent shockwaves through the board of directors and major investors, many of whom were already questioning Chloe and Ethan's leadership. "They're trying to destroy us," Chloe shouted during an emergency meeting with the board. Her voice was laced with panic, a stark contrast to her usual composed demeanor. "This is ridiculous. We've done nothing wrong." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The board members, who had once blindly supported her, were now skeptical. Rumors of mismanagement and financial irregularities had spread like wildfire, fueled by the leaks Daniel and I had orchestrated. Investors demanded answers, and clients began pulling out in droves. Bellatech's reputation was crumbling faster than Chloe could repair it. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed paralyzed by fear. He avoided speaking during meetings, his face pale and drawn. Gone was the confident man who had once promised to stand by my side. In his place was a shadow of the person he used to be, a man who had gambled everything and lost. As the pressure mounted, I decided it was time to escalate my plan further. I arranged a private meeting with Richard Langston, the investor whose concerns I had uncovered earlier. Richard had always been a staunch supporter of Bellatech, and I knew he would play a crucial role in turning the tide against Ethan and Chloe. "Sam, I've seen the evidence," Richard said when we met. "What you're doing is risky, but it's necessary. They've betrayed everyone who ever believed in this company." I nodded, my resolve firm. "I'm not letting them get away with this, Richard. Not after everything they've done." Together, we devised a strategy to strip Ethan and Chloe of their power. Richard reached out to other key investors and board members, urging them to support my case and demand accountability. Within days, a coalition formed, a group of influential figures, determined to hold Ethan and Chloe responsible for their actions. With this support behind me, I called for an emergency board meeting. It was time to confront Ethan and Chloe publicly and force their removal from Bellatech. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the conference room with my head held high. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan and Chloe sat at the far end of the table, their expressions grim. They knew what was coming, but they were powerless to stop it. "I'd like to call this meeting to order," I began, my voice steady and commanding. "As many of you are aware, serious allegations have been made against the current leadership of Belitech. Allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and gross mismanagement." I paused, allowing my words to sink in before continuing. "Over the past few weeks, I've gathered substantial evidence proving that Ethan Hayes and Chloe Bennett acted illegally in my absence. They sold off company assets without authorization, manipulated financial reports, and misled investors. Furthermore, they attempted to seize control of Belitech through deceitful means. I then proceeded to present the evidence: emails, recordings, financial statements, all meticulously organized to tell a damning story. Every document reinforced the narrative that Ethan and Chloe had betrayed not only me but also everyone who had ever believed in Belitech. By the time I finished, the room was silent. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, while Ethan and Chloe sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. "This is outrageous," Chloe finally exclaimed, breaking the silence. "You can't prove any of this. These accusations are baseless." "Oh, but I can," I replied, smiling coldly. "And I already have. Your actions are being investigated by the authorities as we speak. You'll both be facing charges for fraud and embezzlement." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Ethan slumped back in his chair, defeated. For the first time, they realized the full extent of their downfall. The board wasted no time in taking action. A vote was called to remove Ethan and Chloe from their positions immediately. The decision was unanimous. As they were escorted out of the room, I felt a wave of vindication wash over me. Justice had been served, or so I thought. But I wasn't naive enough to believe this was the end. Ethan and Chloe still had allies, people who might try to protect them or sabotage my efforts. I needed to stay vigilant, ensuring that they couldn't regain any semblance of power. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly to stabilize Belitech. With Richard's help, I negotiated a settlement with the dummy corporation, transferring ownership of the patents back to Belitech under strict conditions. This move not only secured the company's future but also sent a clear message. Belitech belonged to me and no one else. As the dust settled, I reflected on everything I had endured. The betrayal, the pain, the sleepless nights they had, all led me to this moment. I had risen from the ashes of my own destruction, stronger and more determined than ever. But there was still one final piece of the puzzle: confronting Ethan and Chloe. Personally, I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to understand the devastation they had caused. It was time to deliver the final blow. I arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a potential settlement. When they arrived, they looked haggard, their confidence shattered. Chloe's usually immaculate appearance was marred by dark circles under her eyes, while Ethan's hands trembled as he fidgeted with his tie. "What do you want, Sam?" Chloe snapped, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Haven't you done enough?" I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "This isn't about revenge," I said calmly. "It's about justice. You took everything from me, my company, my reputation, my trust. But you forgot one thing. I always come back stronger." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan muttered, almost inaudibly, "We didn't mean for it to go this far, didn't you?" I shot back, my voice sharp. "You saw me lying in that hospital bed and thought I was broken. You thought I'd never find out what you did, but you underestimated me. And now you'll pay the price." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. They both knew there was nothing left to say. Their betrayal had been exposed, their lies unraveled. There was no coming back from this. As I watched them leave, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. This wasn't just about reclaiming Bellatek, it was about reclaiming myself. The woman who had once trusted too easily, who had believed that kindness and integrity were enough to succeed, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to fight for what was hers. But my journey wasn't over yet. There was still one final chapter to write, the moment when I would stand victorious, not just as the CEO of Bellatek, but as the architect of my own redemption. With Ethan and Chloe removed from their positions, I finally had the opportunity to rebuild Bellatek and restore its reputation. But it wasn't going to be easy. The damage they had caused ran deep. Clients were hesitant to return, investors were wary, and morale among employees was at an all-time low. It was clear that simply removing the culprits wasn't enough. I needed to prove to everyone, both inside and outside the company, that Bellatek was still the innovative, trustworthy organization it had always been. I began by addressing the staff, standing in front of the team that had once been my second family. I felt a mix of emotions: sadness for what we had lost, but also hope for what we could regain. "I know the past few months have been difficult," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ethan and Chloe betrayed not only me but all of you. They took advantage of our trust, our hard work, and our dedication. But we're not defeated. We're survivors, and together we can rebuild something even stronger than before." The room was silent, but I could see the flicker of determination in their eyes. They wanted to believe me, to trust that things could get better. I knew I had to deliver on that promise. Over the next few weeks, I implemented a series of changes designed to restore transparency and accountability within the company. I restructured the leadership team, bringing back former employees who had left due to dissatisfaction with Chloe's management. I also introduced new policies to ensure that decisions were made collaboratively, with input from every department, to rebuild trust with clients and investors. I organized a series of town hall meetings where I openly addressed the issues that had plagued Bellatek. I admitted the mistakes that had been made, not to absolve myself of responsibility, but to show that I was committed to transparency and growth. "We messed up," I told a group of skeptical investors during one such meeting, "but we're owning those mistakes, and we're doing everything in our power to make things right." Bellatek is more than just a company, it's a vision. And I'm asking you to give us another chance to bring that vision to life. Slowly but surely, people began to believe in Bellatek again. Clients returned, investors renewed their support, and employees rediscovered their passion for the work we were doing. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but every small victory fueled my determination to keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Ethan and Chloe were scrambling to save themselves. They had been formally charged with fraud and embezzlement, and their legal troubles were far from over. Rumors swirled about their attempts to negotiate plea deals or find scapegoats to take the fall for them. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a call from Margaret. Her tone was urgent. "Sam, you need to hear this," she said. "Ethan and Chloe are trying to countersue. They're claiming you orchestrated the entire thing out of spite." I froze, gripping the phone tightly. "What? That's absurd. They have no evidence to back that up." "Oh, But they don't need evidence, Margaret replied grimly. They're desperate. And desperation makes people dangerous. Her warning sent a chill down my spine. She was right, Ethan and Chloe weren't going to go down without a fight. If I wanted to protect myself and Bellatek, I needed to stay one step ahead of them. That night, I called Richard Langston. He had become not just an ally but a trusted confidant, someone who understood the stakes as well as I did. They're trying to turn the narrative against me, I told him, claiming I'm the villain in all of this. Richard sighed. It's a classic tactic, blame the victim. But we can't let them succeed. We need to double down on exposing the truth. Together, we devised a plan to preemptively counter their claims. Using the evidence I had gathered, we prepared a comprehensive report detailing every illegal action Ethan and Chloe had taken. We distributed it to key stakeholders, ensuring that anyone who might doubt my intentions had access to the facts. At the same time, I decided it was time to confront Ethan and Chloe personally. I wanted them to face me not through lawyers or courtrooms, but face to face. It was time to deliver the final blow. I arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a potential settlement. When they arrived, they looked haggard, their confidence shattered. Chloe's usually immaculate appearance was marred by dark circles under her eyes, while Ethan's hands trembled as he fidgeted with his tie. "What do you want, Sam?" Chloe snapped, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Haven't you done enough?" I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "This isn't about revenge," I said calmly. "It's about justice. You took everything from me, my company, my reputation, my trust. But you forgot one thing. I always come back stronger." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan muttered, almost inaudibly, "We didn't mean for it to go this far, didn't you?" I shot back, my voice sharp. "You saw me lying in that hospital bed and thought I was broken. You thought I'd never find out what you did. But you underestimated me. And now, you'll pay the price." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. They both knew there was nothing left to say. Their betrayal had been exposed, their lies unraveled. There was no coming back from this. As I watched them leave, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. This wasn't just about reclaiming Bellatek, it was about reclaiming myself. The woman who had once trusted too easily, who had believed that kindness and integrity were enough to succeed, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to fight for what was hers. But my journey wasn't over yet. There was still one final piece of the puzzle. Confronting Ethan and Chloe personally, I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to understand the devastation they had caused. It was time to deliver the final blow. The victory over Ethan and Chloe had been sweet, but it wasn't the end of my journey. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter. Reclaiming Bellatek and exposing their betrayal had given me back my company, but there was still work to be done. The scars they left behind, both within the organization and within myself, needed time to heal. And as much as I wanted to believe that the hardest battles were behind me, I knew better. Life had a way of testing us when we least expected it. One morning, as I sat at my desk reviewing quarterly reports, I received an email that sent a shiver down my spine. It was from an anonymous sender, with a subject line that read, "You're not finished yet." My heart raced as I opened the message. Inside was a single sentence: "The truth has a way of coming back to haunt you." At first, I thought it might be a prank or an empty threat, but something about the tone felt deliberate, calculated. Whoever had sent it knew exactly how to unsettle me. Memories of Ethan and Chloe's betrayal flooded my mind, and for a moment, I felt that familiar pang of vulnerability, the same fear that had gripped me when I first discovered their lies. I immediately forwarded the email to Margaret, who had become not just my legal advisor but also a trusted confidant. She responded within minutes. "This could be nothing," she said cautiously, "but we can't afford to ignore it. Let's run a trace on the sender and see what we're dealing with." As the investigation unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random threat. Someone out there still harbored resentment, or worse, intended to sabotage everything I had worked so hard to rebuild. The thought was paralyzing, but I refused to let it consume me. If there was one thing I had learned throughout this ordeal, it was that fear only held power if you let it. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work, channeling my anxiety into productivity. Bellatech was thriving again, and I was determined to keep it that way. We had launched several successful projects, secured lucrative partnerships, and even begun expanding into international markets. The team was energized, united by a shared sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly unstoppable. But beneath the surface, doubts lingered. Was I being paranoid? Or was there really someone out there plotting against me? The uncertainty weighed heavily on my mind, especially late at night when the office was quiet and my thoughts ran wild. It wasn't until a week later that the next piece of the puzzle fell into place. A whistleblower contacted me anonymously, claiming to have information about a conspiracy involving former Bellatech executives, including Ethan and Chloe. According to the source, they had been secretly working with a rival tech company to undermine Bellatech's operations and steal proprietary technology. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. How could they possibly think they could get away with this? Even after everything they had done, they still hadn't learned their lesson. Their greed knew no bounds. I arranged a meeting with Richard Langston to discuss the implications. His expression grew grave as I laid out the details. "This is bigger than just Ethan and Chloe," he said finally. "If they've partnered with a competitor, it means they're willing to burn every bridge to save themselves. We need to act fast before they cause irreparable damage." Together, we devised a plan to expose the conspiracy. Using the evidence provided by the whistleblower, we traced the connections between the rival company and Bellatech's former leadership. What we uncovered was staggering, a web of deceit and corruption that stretched far beyond anything I had imagined. Armed with this new information, I called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. When I presented the findings, the room erupted in shock and anger. "How could they do this?" one board member exclaimed. "After everything they've already done, they're still trying to destroy us. They're desperate," I replied calmly. "And desperation makes people reckless. But this time, we're ready for them." With the board's full support, I initiated legal proceedings against the rival company, accusing them of corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. At the same time, I worked with law enforcement to ensure that Ethan and Chloe faced additional charges for their involvement in the conspiracy. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented. Headlines blared with stories of betrayal, corruption, and redemption. Bellatech became a symbol of resilience not just because of its technological innovations, but because of its ability to overcome adversity and emerge stronger than ever. Through it all, I remained focused, refusing to let the chaos distract me from my mission. This wasn't just about protecting Bellatech. It was about proving to myself and to the world that I was capable of rising above anything life threw at me. But as the dust settled and the conspirators were brought to justice, I realized that the greatest challenge I faced wasn't external, it was internal. The journey had changed me in ways I never anticipated. I had started as a woman defined by trust and idealism, only to become someone hardened by betrayal and loss. Now, standing on the other side of the storm, I had to decide who I wanted to be moving forward. Was I still the same Sam who believed in kindness and integrity? Or had the pain and anger transformed me into someone unrecognizable? As the conspiracy unraveled and the rival company's involvement was exposed, I found myself at a crossroads. The legal proceedings against Ethan, Chloe, and their accomplices were well underway, and it was clear that justice would prevail. But as satisfying as it was to see them held accountable, I couldn't ignore the toll this battle had taken on me. For months, I had been consumed by anger at their betrayal, anger at the damage they had caused, anger at the person I had become in response to it all. I had fought relentlessly, refusing to let them win. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of who I was before the storm. The Sam who had once believed in trust, kindness, and collaboration felt like a distant memory. One evening, after another long day of meetings and strategy sessions, I decided to take a walk through the city. The streets were alive with energy, the hum of conversation and laughter filling the air. As I wandered aimlessly, I found myself standing outside the small cafe where I had first met Richard Langston during my recovery. It was strange how much had changed since then, and yet how some things remained the same. I stepped inside, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window, watching the world go by. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe, to truly pause and reflect on everything I had been through. The journey had been grueling, but it had also been transformative. I had faced unimaginable adversity and emerged stronger because of it. I had learned to fight not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever believed in Belitech. And while the scars of betrayal still lingered, they no longer defined me. They were reminders of what I had overcome, not limitations on who I could become. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the people who had stood by me throughout this ordeal. Margaret, whose wisdom and guidance had been invaluable. Daniel, whose loyalty and resourcefulness had helped expose the truth. Lisa, whose quiet courage had provided crucial support when I needed it most. And Richard, whose unwavering belief in Belitech had given me the strength to keep going. But more than anything, I thought about the team at Belitech, the employees, who had weathered the storm alongside me. They weren't just colleagues, they were family. Together, we had rebuilt something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. And now, as we stood on the brink of a new era, I realized that our greatest strength wasn't in our technology or our profits, it was in our unity, our resilience, and our shared vision for the future. With renewed clarity, I returned to the office the next morning, ready to embrace the final chapter of this journey. The board of directors had scheduled a special meeting to discuss the company's future, and I knew it was time to lay out my plans for the road ahead. "We've come so far," I began, addressing the room. "From the depths of betrayal and loss, we've risen together to reclaim what is ours. But this isn't just about survival, it's about thriving, about proving that no matter what challenges we face, we have the strength to overcome them." I outlined a bold vision for Belitech's future, expanding into underserved markets, investing in sustainable technologies, and fostering innovation through collaboration. It was ambitious, but I knew we were capable of achieving greatness if we worked together. The board erupted into applause, their enthusiasm mirroring my own. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of peace, not because the fight was over, but because I finally understood what it meant to lead with purpose. Later that day, I received a call from Margaret. Her tone was unusually somber. "Sam, there's something you need to hear," she said. "Ethan and Chloe have agreed to testify against the rival company in exchange for reduced sentences. Their trial is set for next week." I froze, gripping the phone tightly. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to relish the knowledge that they would finally face consequences for their actions. But another part of me felt empty. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward. "I'll be there," I replied softly. When the day of the trial arrived, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Ethan and Chloe looked defeated, their arrogance replaced by shame, as they took the stand, recounting their role in the conspiracy. I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a profound sense of closure. After the verdict was delivered guilty on all counts, I stepped outside, breathing in the crisp autumn air. It was over. Finally, truly over. But as I stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one, a story of redemption, growth, and limitless possibilities. Bellatech was no longer just my company. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of perseverance. And I was no longer the woman who had trusted too easily or fought too fiercely. I was someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. This was my victory, not just over Ethan and Chloe, but over fear, doubt, and despair. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head on, because I was Samantha Hayes, and I always came back stronger.